the digital individual. We have been reading over the past few months a book that predates the digital age. So when Foucault wrote it, there was no digital infrastructure. Or at least, yes, there was one, but it was narrowly locked in the armies, so military environments, as well as a handful of universities, research universities, had computers and had a little bit of the internet, you know, the very early internet, but it wasn't available for people like us. So he wrote in a society that was basically analog. He wrote about an offline society. And of course, when he gives his historical overview, he basically goes back to eras that were even less developed in terms of infrastructure, so to speak. When he speaks about the 18th century, we're basically talking about an era in which the very first newspapers appeared. So that's how huge the change has been. And the very first newspapers appear in the 18th century, in the UK as well as in a number of other countries in the world, all right? But they are, of course, very small operations. In terms of readership, it's absolutely not a mass readership that we now have. We're not speaking about millions, we're basically speaking about thousands of people, usually upper middle class, and all concentrated in the cities. When he speaks about the 19th century, we are speaking about the era of, you know, do you remember the telegraph? So this is a revolution that emerges. Also newspapers become a lot more widespread. That's about it. So 18th and 19th century are definitely not the digital age. Yet the argument that he develops in this book and in a number of other things that he's done, I think is relevant still for the digital age. And in what follows, I'm going to try to extract a number of the central items from, or the central ideas, the central motives from the work, after which I'm going to try to move it a little bit into life after Foucault. And so after he died, we witnessed another revolution, the digital one, and let's basically see how the individual, normal as well as abnormal, the individual that he describes, how it reoccurs and how a number of the elements that he identifies in this book may be still relevant or even more relevant than ever before. So this is the point. And let's begin with the extraction, so to speak, of the main elements from his book. And here's the question, who is the individual, right? At the end of that long history that he describes, who is the modern individual, the individual of modernity? Now you have noticed, of course, that Foucault is not a guy who makes you happy. He is not there to bring you good news. And a lot of what he says about the individual runs directly against the dominant ideologies we have about who we are, you know, the self and the individual as a free, autonomous, highly creative, etc., unlimited, basically, unit. Now, in his view, really the opposite. So the first point I think we can extract from his work is the modern individual is measured. So one of the features of the individual is that the individual is always placed in relation with others by means of measurement. And so here you have science, and I've emphasized over and over again, you know, as did Foucault, that one of the big features of this history is that there is the explosion, so to speak, of a range of sciences, not only sciences but also technologies that he calls them record keeping. So we start making notes about each and every individual, basically from the moment he or she is born, all the way through his or her life. And so we're always measured, we're always recorded, all sorts of data are being collected about us, and these data are not individual, they are always measured against the data of others. And it is this idea of measurement, of course, that was very, very central to what he did, and to his argument, very, very central. It's through measurement that we maneuver ourselves in a world of averages, and not just averages, but also things like, you know, ideal types, ambitions, heroes, and losers, those who are good, those who are average, and those who are not good. Now, all of this is an effect of measurement. So here's the first feature. The modern individual is a measured social unit, and the measure, at least the measuring, is always done in relation to others. So we constantly compare with others. For those who believe that we're completely free and that we do what we want, yes, You can try, but there will be others, you know, who will measure all of this, right? And also compare what you do against others. Now, all of this, what you know, all the stuff we're going to review, of course, is acutely relevant in the environment of education. And so we are also a measuring institution. When I spoke about the marks are measures in which individuals are measured as to what I think we call performance in relation to others and in relation to averages, in relation to benchmarks and so on. Why is education one of the big centers of measurement? Well, because as he described, education was one of the very, very big systems of modernity in which this dynamic between normal and abnormal was played out. Schools were massive, massive socialization instruments, or became these instruments in the 19th century. And schools have that function, which is also why a lecture hall like this is a panopticon. So it is a very Foucauldian. The environment in which we now dwell is a very, very Foucauldian environment. And here, well, of course, measurement is very important. International students usually also have to take something like an IELTS test, TOEFL or IELTS, an international certificate for academic English. What is this about? It's about measuring whether you are ready or good enough, you know, for these and these and these universities. And as you know, your scores for IELTS will determine whether or not you can get access to particular universities, because they can be highly, highly demanding. There are universities where you need 8 or more in order to get in. Measuring. An individual is measured. I realize it's a bit of a weird statement, but it's an absolutely central feature of the individual as we now know it. So that's the first point. When an individual is measured, it means that the individual, of course, is basically completely surrounded by instruments and also norms for measuring. The benchmarks. Here in education, a benchmark is a 6, a score of 6 as the benchmark. If you have a lower score, you fail. Now listen to the discourse, that is pure Foucault. And if you have a lower score than a 6, you fail a course and you have to resit. So you have to redo it, you have to do the entire exercise again, and you need a 6. So this is an example of a benchmark. Where does the 6 come from? Because in other countries, you know, they use a 5. 5 is a pass. Well, here in the Netherlands, the idea is our average students have to be better than elsewhere, right? If the Belgians agree to a 5, that's fine for them. But we want better students. And if you want a diploma, you have to do better than the Belgians. Look at number 1. We're non-stop measured in relation to others. Hence the 6. But here the point is, when we have to be measured, we need instruments for, you know, measurement, and the instruments are norms. Lots and lots and lots of norms. And of course the function of these norms is to regulate your behavior. And we have seen that. So there are expectations, either explicit or not, and they regulate behavior, all right? And they can be a million different kinds. We have reviewed that over and over and over again. The next point, yes, we are individuals, but because of the 2 previous points, one of the most important dimensions of our identity is collective. It is the group to which we can be made belong. Right? I measure you, and you get a certain score, and then I will include you in a group category. Either a brilliant student, or slightly better than average one, an underperforming one. We have seen that over and over and over again in the book, on the basis of individual features, an instant move is made so as to include you in particular social groups, particular social identities that are a lot bigger than you. Usually, we have an idea that we do that ourselves. Like, I want to be what? I want to be a Rasta. So I'm going to organize my behavior in such a way that I look and sound and also feel like a Rasta. That is true. We ourselves do a lot of work in order to include ourselves into particular social groups and also particular social categories. Like students, you have done the effort, you know, to include yourself into that. However, most of the groups we belong to are made by others. So we only do a little bit of the work of inclusion ourselves. Most of that work is done by others. And it is done, by the actors that we've already reviewed. It's done by every institution you've been through in life. And it starts, for instance, with your nationality. You have not chosen your own nationality. Well, as a rule, when you're born, no one asks you, do you want to be Dutch? Very few people do. There are laws, there are rules, that are immediately applied. Another thing is, you're a boy or a girl. And again, normally the baby hasn't made a statement on this. It's other people including you. Do remember that, eh? Most of the groups we belong to are groups we have not chosen ourselves. They are chosen by a dynamic of norms, of inclusion and exclusion, and again, measurement is the key to that. So we will always evaluate your behavior, and it's on the basis of that evaluation, that we can say, you are this, or you belong to that group, or I understand you as a member of this category of students or whatever. For instance, we can do the trick. Who is Dutch here? Have you chosen your nationality yourself? But you see, we immediately have two groups in the audience here. Those who are Dutch and those who are non-Dutch. Okay, I have made this distinction now. I've created it. And then the elements that were useful for this creation of these two groups in the audience here are elements that you have not chosen yourself. Now, there are more groups than individuals. In any society, there are more groups than individuals. And if you don't believe me, just make a list of all the groups you belong to. Both, the informal groups as well as the formal groups. And you will see that each of you is a member of at least, 20, 30, 40 groups. And that's just one individual. There are always more social groups than there are individuals. How come? Well, it's because individuals are not necessarily the only creators of social groupness. Usually we are being grouped by others. So others make groups around us. It's very important if you want to understand modern society. The idea, that we are free social actors is true, but only to some extent. The other dimension of who we are is basically a dimension over which we have no control, or very little control. We have control, in the case of students, for instance, in the sense that, yes, you can work hard in order to get a 6 or more. So that's up to you. But you have not created the benchmarks or the norms, and you have no influence on them. So if I score you a 4, and you say, but Mr. Blommaert, I'm brilliant, the 4 will remain. That's usually not an argument, that we would accept, all right? But I'm the most brilliant student. You don't understand me. And so you can say that, but it will not have any effect. And so a lot of what we do in society is actually organized by others, and is controlled by others, is also structured by others, is in a way formatted by others, and definitely when it comes to normativity, is usually beyond our control. That's why, many people do not like Foucault. We've already discussed this notion of individual freedom. That's not how we like to think of ourselves, right? As tightly controlled human beings who have a tiny little space of individual freedom, and even that space we have a strong tendency to regulate it and to control it, to restrict our own freedom. That's not how we love to see ourselves. We love to see ourselves as exactly the opposite. But his point is, well, that's all part of the game. You need to feel entirely free in order to have the idea that, all these different systems of control are not bad for you. You choose them or operate them, so to speak, yourself. When you get dressed in the morning, maybe you fancy that would be a lot nicer to walk around naked. Imagine it's 36 degrees outside, dry day, beautiful weather, and you would like to run around naked. Very few people will really do that. Reason being, there's a law against it. That's not a thing you do. You can get sanctioned for it. And so we dress, not by choice, but through the normativity of the entire society, and also the real forces, that control our behavior. And we think that we're free because we choose the particular dresses. We say, I'm going to wear the yellow t-shirt and not the green one today. So that's his view of individual freedom. And of course, it's not a thing that makes people happy or feel good about themselves. What they usually do is they implement existing norms and give them a little accent. So why is one university different from another? Why is one, say, program in a university different from another? That's the little bit of accent, that the academic staff have in order to put a little bit more emphasis on this and a little bit less here, and also try to stimulate these activities rather than these. That's the space we have, but it's a space which is very, very tightly organized and restricted. For instance, I am not a great fan, never have been, of marking. I don't think that a mark in any way represents who you are. And I try to say that to students as well, you've done really good work, but it doesn't mean that you're going to get an 8. But I know that, so for instance, in the context of who you were at the beginning of the course, and if I look at you, who you are now, you have massively grown, but I can only give you a 6 or a 7 for that. I, as an individual, I find the growth trajectory a lot more important than how we, organizationally, need to register that. And for the registration of these marks, we got very strict criteria. Everything is controlled, double-checked, also checked at higher levels, and so on and so on. So we have official benchmarks. Now, I could say, well, you know what? I hate marks. I'm not going to give you any marks. You don't need it. Well, all of us would be in trouble. You in the first place. I can always say, well, I'm an old guy. I do what I want. That's not really true, but in your case, you guys would miss a mark and would never get a diploma. So that's how it works. I have a little bit of space, and I create norms if you wish, but I can only create norms that are an inflection of existing norms. So I can do things a little bit in a different way, but still within the bigger structure. In the end, it's about a space of freedom and freedom as accent in a way. So you have that little bit of agency that enables you to bend the rule slightly, but never violate it. If you violate it, you get into serious trouble. It's not nice to hear. Next point, the rationale behind this entire system in which we are non-stop measured, evaluated, surrounded by norms, and included into all sorts of different social groups. And again, he emphasized that a lot, and he would emphasize that in his lectures of the year after that. And society needs to be protected. The rationale is risk. We have seen that. So unless we keep an eye on you, unless we measure and regulate your behavior, you might become a risk. And not just a risk to yourself, you're an individual, okay? So you may harm yourself. No. The real problem is you may become a risk to society. And in that sense, which is why society should do everything in order to lower that risk. And so the rationale behind everything, behind the emerging modern individual, is a very, very strong sense of risk. And in the eyes of Foucault, risk is associated with being abnormal. Being abnormal. If you're not normal, all right, then you are a risk for the others. You may harm them, or, and for instance, in the case of the organized labor movement, which we discussed a couple of weeks ago, the others may believe you, and also they may want to follow you. They may want to become like you. They may start hating us, and they may overthrow us. So this idea of risk is very, very acute all through the 19th and the 20th century. Risks in society need to be controlled, and we have to control them by controlling individuals, but individuals as measurable units in society. So that's the logic that he describes. And then, of course, every form of protection by society is okay, as long as we can argue that we lower the risk. And risk thinking is everywhere. You hear it in the context of university programs, for instance. There will be reviews of the entire university again, and one of the things we hear all the time in our department is, yeah, but if students take your program, what's the risk that they remain unemployed? Actually, it's very, very low. But that's the idea of a risk. So when we organize the program for students, we need to reduce the risk, and there is a risk analysis involved. So you need to do a risk analysis when you want to teach a particular program. And the risk analysis is about employability. We're not going to do an effort for students who are useless in society, okay, are up to no good and have no serious jobs. That's, the logic of risk. And the protection against risk, and here again, we've seen a few features. The instruments are, of course, to educate. So again, the entire system of education is there, but also media, and all sorts of informal systems of influencing, right, through organizations, but also through the family. We've seen that it works all the way through society. Eventually, it's about you, yourself. So you are the one who have to how should I say, educate. Also train yourself, to be normal and to control your instincts, to control your irrational drives and so on and so on. You, at the end of the line, there is you who is the agent of self-control, the care of the self. And so you have to do it. But in between, there's the family, there's the school, there's the medical system, there's the labor market, name it. I mean, in every segment of society, you have these dimensions. The instruments that are used, of course, surveillance. We keep an eye on you all the time, right? We're going to try to make records of your behavior all through life, by your power, and all through life, from day one until the very final day, and a number of instances after that as well. There's control, and of course, there's a very important role for institutions. He emphasizes that as well. For instance, the birth of the modern sciences, and in that sense, of new schools, if you wish, in which these knowledges are being made and also made legitimate and are being also disseminated, distributed. They're very, very important in the entire system. But of course, media are very important institutions. And then finally, he also emphasized that the control of risks, or the avoidance of risks, or the reduction of risks has to be complete. All right? It has to be applied to everybody, everywhere, and all the time. And in every aspect of who we are at any moment in our lives. So any little detail of our behavior might be included in a system of surveillance and regulation. What now follows, I'm just going to give an illustration of, at first sight, innocuous examples, so that look very, very, very neutral, innocent, normal, if you wish. We see them all the time. But look at the connection between you, the consumer, and an expert, an institution. So here, of course, there is the dentist who recommends that you use this particular brand. A lot of advertisement zooms in onto you, of course, as an individual. You have to buy it, all right? But those who instruct you to buy it are institutional forces, are experts, those who control all that knowledge of measurement and of inclusion or exclusion in social groups. Those are the guys who emphasize that you should use this particular product in order to be healthy. We're going to see a lot of this. So, of course, this is normal. Same thing here. Whenever you have these products, you will see dentists, okay, or people in research departments of universities or private corporations and so on and so on. So here you can easily see that this individual is dressed as an expert. And so it's not me saying that you need to buy it, and it's not you also deciding all by yourself. Now, in the end, of course, you do, but here the idea is we're going to try to influence you, we're going to try to educate you, all right? And who will educate you? Well, the experts, those who control all this knowledge. Also look at measurement here, the use of percentages. That's a strong argument, right? So here, it is the click between individuals and institutional knowledge organization that he emphasized all the way through. With measurement, inclusion, exclusion, and so on. Other people are influencers, like celebrities. They're also important. Who is this again? Shakira. So here is a beauty product. And now it's not a dentist who recommends that you use it, but it's an influencer. So it's an individual whom is widely admired, and in that sense is also sensed to have an educational role. So if you use the products that I use, Shakira, then you will be as beautiful as I am. So you see, here is you, and then here is an entirely different organization of knowledge that is brought to you in view of your decision. This is the way in which the regulation of behavior works. It's by experts and influencers basically saying, this is good for you. And unless you follow my advice, you make an error. You're not healthy or not beautiful, and so on. Here again, we see it, inspected by experts, right? So this fruit is not just good because the farmer says so, or because the shop says so. No. It's good because it's been inspected by experts. And we trust that, or at least, they use it because they assume that we trust it. Now we know that a lot of what you see there is bogus, and that like the 98%, that you see is based on a sloppy study, no study in a number of instances, just fake. But even so, a very strong suggestion that listen to this guy, or to these guys, because they know what they're talking about. And if they say this is good for you, it's good for you. So don't argue, don't negotiate, just buy this product. And you would see that our consumption environment is completely saturated by all of that here as well. So you have to eat your veggies, not because your mom says so, but the American Heart Association says so, right? Again, expert knowledge, and so on. And then, again, this idea, it applies to everybody, and it applies everywhere and at every moment in life. We have strongly emphasized, or at least he has very, very strongly emphasized, that the family is a very important unit of control, and that control has to start from a very, very young age. Here you see it literally. Healthy hearts begin at a very young age. Now, this is, of course, positively formulated, but the implication is that if you don't start young, your child may have a heart problem, or may in a way develop one that might be very harmful later in life. And then you are not a good mom. And so here's the moralization. Unless you follow this advice, you are not a good person. So you're making an error, and you become a risk to society. So you have to follow this, otherwise you become a risk to others, and you become a risk to society. I'm saying here, that kids don't like milk, or they don't like particular products. Like Brussels sprouts, they will never eat it. Well, we're going to try to sneak it into their food because it's good for them. And so here it's all about responsibility. And so it's your responsibility as a dad, to give your kids omega-3. It's very good for them. They don't like it, so you need to be smart. And here's a product, that helps you do what you have to do. So again, we see a lot of that, an association between behavior and responsibility towards others, towards society. And so the risk needs to be lowered by you, by all of us. All of us are responsible for lowering risks. But then even if you don't have a lot of money, so here's the working class again, even if you don't have a lot of money, still you have the responsibility to give your children healthy food. And you find a lot of information about how, even when you live on a small budget, even if you're a single mom, even if the circumstances are not favorable, how even then you can give healthy food to your children because you still remain responsible. And so here you see the point. All of us, through our individual behavior, are responsible for society. And so our accountability is not simply towards ourselves, it's towards society. And there are all sorts of structures in society that repeat that over and over and over again, over and over and over. Do this and do that and do that, because if you don't, then you're not really being responsible. Being responsible is rarely only towards yourself. It is usually towards society. And in that sense, increasingly, these forms of responsibility would be expressed in money terms. So we would read reports, for instance, that obesitas creates a loss for society of 11 billion on a yearly basis, okay? Or, at one point I even read a report about suicide. Suicide is a very expensive thing for society. We, all of us, have to pay for those losers who commit suicide, $500 million a year. So they commit suicide, and they should not have done that because they have created harm for all of us, $500 million worth. So that's how now increasingly you see that logic of responsibility and risk being converted into money. So this is the system, how he described it. And as I said, he described it long before all that stuff was available, or at least there was advertising, of course, but long before the digital world had arrived. So here is the next step. When we now look from the 21st century onto what he had to say in this book, we see that our world has not improved. Even more, we may even see that a lot of the stuff that he announced and or described in this book only became reality in its completeness right now, very recently, due to the digital environment, the digital infrastructure. One of the things, for instance, that did not really exist in his day was the biometrical selfie as we now know it. The idea that on our identity documents, or included in them, there would be a chip, and on that chip, almost all your biometrical data are readable. Like, the color of your eyes, your height, facial recognition pattern, your DNA in a number of cases. So what we now see is how we get a new type of selfie, and a selfie is a digital representation of ourselves on the basis of biometrics. Now, all of this, of course, is new, or at least recent. All of these are developments of the past 1, 2, 3 decades maximally, but the implementation of them is very, very recent. We're basically looking here at the beginning of this decade, so not older than that. And of course, it's now very, very widespread. Fingerprints have to be included everywhere. Scanning eye. Increasingly in high security environments, you would see that the old badge is no longer used, the simple magnetic one. No, you need like a biometrical one. For instance, you need to show your fingerprints or the scans of your eyes, and otherwise you would never get it. So this is new. And interestingly, what we see here is, when we speak about biometrics, we speak about the body. So here again, we see how the body, the thing he so emphasized, the body has become the focus of truth. So it's the readability of your body in a new way, in a highly delicate way, and in a highly sophisticated way. The readability of your body, again, basically speaks the truth about who you really are. So you may claim not to be Osama bin Laden, but we have a facial recognition scan, we have your fingerprints, we have your DNA, and sorry boy, you are Osama bin Laden. No, I'm not. Yes, you are. The body speaks the truth. And so here we see how an idea that he developed about readable bodies and the very dictional dimension of the body, how it only became implemented right now due to new technology, notably through big data. And so increasingly this is about all these aggregates of little bits you left here, little bits you left there, little bits extracted in a medical context, in an educational context, in a security context, and so on and so on. We aggregate all of that, and it is you, and it speaks the truth. Your body speaks the truth. Another thing, but the word, I don't really agree with the notion, the post-humanism, as it is now called, in the sense it's not really post-human. It is, in many ways, strongly about a new type of humanity. But another thing that, of course, he could never have anticipated is the rise of artificial intelligence, with drones, robots, bots, algorithms, smart surveillance, and so on and so on. The Internet of Things, so the fact that when you switch on the heating system at home, that elsewhere somebody can register that. So elsewhere somebody can see that you have switched on your heating. It's also the same when for instance, you buy a computer. The computer does all sorts of things without you giving instructions. So the Internet of Things means that things now are connected without us organizing the connection. Right? So we are not the ones who network our mobile phone to Apple. We are not the ones who do that. Or to Huawei or to Samsung. We don't do that. It is already done. And so here again you see how all sorts of social practices that involve us are not performed by us. They are performed now increasingly by technology. Now, these forms of agency that were external to human beings historically were usually, let's say, attributed to nature. It's a force of nature. The rain, I have not created the rain, right? or sunshine. I did not do that. It's nature doing that. So nature is bigger than us, and of course, nature does all sorts of things to us. The other actors usually were gods, so gods could also do things that we could not do, and that we would be, at least we would believe that we would be involved in or affected by. And now increasingly there's a third partner, so historically an entirely new one, software. Software also does that. The historical role of nature and the gods in explaining our lives has now been, or at least to not do that duo, has now been added software. It also does that. It also does all sorts of things to me, to you, to all of us, that we don't understand. We don't understand the rationality of it. We don't understand the structure of it, but we're affected by it. So this is called post-humanism, but I don't like it. And so here's the question. Who are we actually now as digital individuals? And we have already seen, Foucault gave us this highly negative answer to the question, who are we as modern individuals? Well, when we think about the digital age, the question becomes even more complicated. And there are answers to this question that I don't like. I will give you an example. You no doubt, so this is more or less exactly a year ago, it was the introduction of this new European regulation about data and privacy, which is the reason why ever since we have to click all these agreements for cookies, etc., again. Now here's the guy who was in charge of implementing that. And this is what he says in an interview. Look especially at the very last phrase. We already were data subjects, so that already existed. What he says is, that's going to disappear. And with it, the notion of the individual will in all likelihood disappear, as we will be grouped according to segments of information. Right? So here again you see Foucault. And here's a guy basically implementing a regulation that has to do with privacy, i.e. with individuality. And so the way in which at least he saw it, but it has been implemented, the way in which he imagines the protection of individuality is by basically erasing the idea of the individual. You no longer exist. It is data segments that create you. So if we want to know anything about you, we don't need you, like for instance, to make a statement. We don't need your voice. We don't need your agency. We already do know about you. We know who you are, and here is the truth. And so it is no longer what you pretend to be, but it is what our big data have informed us about. So this is one of the answers about the question, who is the digital individual? The answer is, it's gone. It's no longer there. There is no more individual in this world. So the individual has been hocus-pocused away, and now only exists as an effect of data aggregations, data segments. Within that regulation, the central notion, of course, is this one, personal data. And here's the definition of it. What are so-called personal data? Any information relating to an identified or identifiable natural person. All of us are just natural persons. The word individual is no longer there. Natural persons, meaning people who exist in flesh and blood. Now, any information relating to, in any way relating to a natural person, identified or identifiable, is personal data. Now here you see that this any information overwhelmingly is information by and from others. Okay, so we are, and here again, so here's the implementation of what the guy just said. We are basically aggregations of any information that might be related to us. And most of that information is not made by us. For instance, surveillance cameras or like traffic violation cameras and so on and so on. They collect data about us, but we have not made these data. We have not controlled them. And so here, well, essentially you see the end of the individual. The individual is now entirely made by others. Completely made by others. So that little bit of space that Foucault still left us has now been removed. There are no more individuals. And a lot of it is already implemented. So I don't know if you use airports a lot. In a number of, notably bigger airports, you already have these automatic ID control systems that are purely biometrical. Right? So you don't even need a document anymore. And so you just walk through them, and it's on the basis of an aggregation of information. Here's your boarding pass. Your boarding pass has an ID number on it. Or in your booking, you already gave your ID number, so that's aggregated with, and then you go through this and you go through that and that and that. And all of these data are created and joined, and they will establish whether it is really you boarding this plane. No one will ask you, are you really Mr. So-and-so? No one. There is no human interaction anymore. You interact with machines, and the machines also interact with other machines in such a way that they create the truth about you. So here is the digital individual, ladies and gentlemen. It's Foucault extended, made a lot bigger than what we've seen in his treatment of modernity. It's a lot bigger than that. So if we look at the way in which these new technologies, these digital technologies now have a strong tendency to create us, all right, we begin to see what the panopticon really means, and we also begin to see how this little definition that we gave at the very beginning of individuals as measured, nonstop measured, surrounded by norms that are more and more aggregated from huge numbers of data. And in that sense, the benchmarks, the norms, the averages become stronger and stronger and thicker. And an average now is no longer an average over 30 people, but an average over 30 million people, or 300 million people, or 1.5 billion people. So very, very robust averages, so-called benchmarks. Okay, more and more we see the relevance of this. So here's the usefulness of Foucault. He wrote in a day and age where he wrote about the development of something that was only half realized by the time he spoke about it. And so he only began to see the very beginning of it, the very, very, very beginning of it. But of course, compared to where we are now, those beginnings were hardly harmful, all right? They were not very efficient, they were not very comprehensive, they were not very absolute. But now we live in a world where we have all sorts of systems, you know, that basically create the thing that he was really afraid of and that he really, really detested. You guys, for the next couple of years, will be involved in analyzing, studying, you know, that world. Do keep it in mind. There is this dimension in this world in which the individual not only is disappearing or is under pressure, but has to disappear according to the logic of that system. The individual has to disappear because the individual is a risk to society, and a machine is not. That's it for today, and I thank you very much. It was a pleasure working with you.